Hi, this is Chris Pells. In this video, we're going to learn how to create an HTTP filter in ASP.NET. First thing we need to do to create a filter is to create a class that implements the iHTTP module interface. So we'll go up here and add a new project to our solution. And we're going to create this in Visual Basic, and we'll make a class library project. And let's call this HTTP filter VB. Creating this, as I said, in VB, we could easily create it in C#. So let's call our class HTTP filter. So we'll just rename that here. And there we go. Now we need to have a reference to the system.web namespace, so let's add a reference here because that won't be in our project by default. There we go. Okay, let's go down here to system.web and we'll add a reference for that. Let's just show all files here and check out our references. There we go. Okay. So now we're all set to start implementing our class, and as I said, it needs to implement the iHTTP module interface. Let's put that in. Okay, now to make it our life easier here, we're going to add a few imports to our class so we don't have to type the fully qualified namespace. Put system in here. Let's put system.web and let's put system.diagnostics. And while we're at it, let's define a namespace here, and let's call it HDI for how do I. And let's close that off here. Alright. So we need to implement two methods for the iHTTP module interface. That's why we're getting our little squiggly line here. So we'll just put the cursor at the end of that, hit enter, and we get the dispose and init interfaces that we need to implement. So the init event or method is called when the application, in this case the web application, is initialized, and the dispose event is called when it shuts down. So what we're going to do here in our sample is write out some information to a text file at various points in the filtering process to show how you would capture information, and at least one way that you can write it out. Obviously there'd be a lot of options for writing out information if that's what you want to do. So let me set up a couple private variables here, and the first one I'm going to set up is a name for the file where we're going to store things. Then I'm going to set up a file writer, instance of a stream writer actually. And that's how we're going to write our information out. And so this would be a system.io.streamWriter. Then we want to store the context variable information, which comes inbound to the init method down below. So let's make a private variable, and we'll call this application context. And that is going to be an instance of HTTP application. So that'll get us started here. Now let's go down to the init method and add a few things in here. And the first thing I want to do is create a file name so that we have some place to store the information. And for the demo, what we're going to do is take that file name variable, and we are going to take the application context coming in here. Take the context object that is contained within the application, and the request, inbound request, and we'll take the physical application path, so it puts it in the folder where our application is running. And let's just call this HTTP filter.txt. Then, as I said, there's a couple other things that we want to store. So the next thing that we'll do here is take that module-wide application context variable, and in that we will store the inbound application context passed to the init method, and that looks good for starters. Okay, let's write out the first information to our file here in the init method. So to do that, we need to set up our file writer that we created up above. So that's a new system.io.streamWriter, and here we need to pass the file name that we have stored in the module variable, and we will put true to indicate that we want it opened in the append mode. So what do we want to write? Let's write out here, right line, and we'll just write the current date time now to string, and this is just going to be a timestamp as to when we write the different things out. And we'll put the hours, minutes, seconds, and we'll put some fractions of a second because this will be going through pretty quickly. Alright, and then let's just write a brief message that says init, so we know that it was in this part of the program at this point in time, and we'll just flush out the contents of the writer, and for this demo we're going to close the writer here. So let's do the same sort of thing up. We have one little typo here. Let's just correct that. There we go. So we want to do the same sort of thing up in the dispose method. So we'll copy this here and put this up here so that we know when we're in the dispose method, and we'll just change init to dispose. So at this point, all we've done is write out some information to a text file for the initialization and the dispose of the application. Obviously, you could do a lot more here instead of just writing out to a file whatever operations you want to do. So there's a variety of events that indicate different points in the processing where you can intervene, and I put those here in a Word document for us to take a look at. And this Word document is included in the sample code download, so you can look at this, and they're also available in the online documentation in MSDN. But as you can see here, there's a number of points in the processing in which you can intervene. And what we're going to do is implement one of these as an example of how you would implement all of the rest of them. We're going to do a begin request event. One thing to note before we leave this and go back to Visual Studio is that this list here indicates the order in which these events are fired, so that if you want to intervene at a particular process or do things in a certain sequence, you need to consider the sequence in which the events are fired. So we'll go back over to Visual Studio now, and let's implement the begin request event. So in order to do that, the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to go up here to our module-wide variables, and we need to add another one which will be an event handler for the begin request event. So we'll add that, and we'll call it the begin request event handler, and that is going to be of type event handler. And we need to add that event handler down here when the application initializes. So we'll do that right down here. And we need to add handler.